Hi, my name's Diana Kirk from the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and I'm going to talk to you about some experiences we had with a technique called Repertory grid technique during a recent study. So the title of the talk is Challenges, excuse me, when applying repertory grid techniques for software practices, and it was carried out in conjunction with Kelly Blinko, who's also from the University of Auckland. I'll overview repertory grid technique and its underlying theory, which is personal construct theory, and I'll then discuss the motivation for the work, which was relating to situated software practices. I'll then talk about the challenges we met during the study and discuss what we took from that. So personal construct theory was created by George Kelly in the 1950s, and his idea is that a person understands reality by interpreting what they see. And of course, there are going to be very many different sorts of interpretations, which means there's an enormous variety in cognitive constructions for a given phenomenon. And this is in direct contrast with the idea that you can find out truth and capture it. So some key ideas from this are that a person's beliefs, the way what they believe and how they understand things, will influence in a large way how they behave in future. And this has also been acknowledged within the IS domain. And the other idea is that a person's construct is dichotomous, i.e. It's bipolar in nature. So it's people either think in terms of opposites or contrasts. There are some corollaries that result from this theory. First is construction. A person creates a unique mental construction based on similarity and difference. It's unlikely that two individuals will create identical systems. A construction system for a person comprises a finite number of bipolar constructs. That's a dichotomy. New experiences cause a person to modify their system of constructs. A person can support incompatible systems, and people with similar construct systems are psychologically similar. So repertory grid technique is a standard way of implementing PCT. It was created by Kelly really to understand variations in how different people see the same phenomenon. But it has been used frequently in the IS domain, mainly as a means of structured interviewing. There are four key components to a repertory grid study. A topic defines the domain of interest, so for us it's software practices. Elements are the items of interest within this domain, and for us it's a given instantiation of a practice, so a practice implementation. Constructs really are the characteristics assigned to elements, and these are bipolar in nature. And so the way that you carry out a study to get constructs, to elicit constructs in an RGT study, is to ask the participant to choose, say, 4 or 6 elements, half of which are perceived as having been successful, having gone well, being good, and half of which are perceived as being unsuccessful or bad. And you choose 2 of the good ones and 1 of the bad ones, and you ask the participant to identify any similarities between the 2 good ones that are different from the bad one, that may have caused the good ones to be good and the bad one to be bad. And this is a triadic approach. And you then look at 2 bad ones and 1 good one, and look at the different combinations of 3. The triadic approach is the recommended one for gaining the richest data from participants, but some researchers simplify it to a dyadic approach where it's 1 good and 1 bad. And the whole thing's based on the idea of similarities and differences. And another important thing to comment on is that the notion of conducting the interview this way is aimed at getting information from the participants that's unsullied and not affected by the viewpoints of the interviewer. And then finally, the final component is ratings. You can ask a participant to rate the different elements according to its value, the values of the different characteristics, if that's the kind of study you're doing. Kelly believed that a system of constructs is like a hierarchy relating by cause and effect hierarchy. So when you're carrying out interviews, you can use laddering up, in which case you would say, why does this matter? Why is this important? And this takes you up to the higher, more abstract notions in the person's mind. You can also ladder down to get a more clear idea of what the construct, of the meaning of the construct, by saying, can you be more specific? And this takes you down to more basic ideas from the person's perspective. There are lots of design decisions you have to make depending upon the study objective. For example, who chooses the components? Do you do ratings? Do you do laddering? And do you use a triadic or a dyadic process? So for our study, our research objective was to understand practitioners' viewpoints on the contextual factors that affect the effectiveness of situated software practices. We've long understood that practitioners do not follow methodologies, for example, XP as written, but they rather adapt things and merge methodologies to suit their specific contexts. And that leads us to the idea that we have to really focus at the level of the practice. When is a practice going to be suitable for a specific organization? But to understand that, we need to understand context. We need to somehow abstract context. And in our view, this abstraction of context is crucial if we want to move forward with accumulating evidence in order that we can support practitioners decide when a practice might be effective. So for us, the topic was software practices, excuse me. The elements were the instances, where specific times a specific practice was carried out. The constructs were the contextual factors. When we ask what were the things that were similar between these two that were different from that one, we're hoping to get information about the contexts that were in place at the time the practice was enacted. We didn't do ratings, and we certainly laddered up and down to understand core values and to clarify meaning. So we chose the topic and the participants chose the elements and the constructs. I won't talk for long to this slide because of time, but we had 12 participants, 3 organizations, and a nice range of different role types and experiences. So the challenges, we've categorized these into 3 themes. The first one relates to time delays. On the left, the participants tended most often to describe the practices in general. So instead of talking about specific instances and similarities and differences, they wanted to tell us about their experiences with the practice. And this was really quite tricky because they were giving us a lot of information that was really important to them and valuable, but it wasn't in the form that we needed. So we had to keep bringing them back to the idea of instances. We certainly didn't want to go over time because, you know, practitioners are busy. We don't want to go over the hour that we had for the meeting. So that left less time for exploring instances. Surprisingly, many of the practitioners have found it difficult to identify the instances. In some cases, 5 out of the 12, we took more than 15 minutes to get down to the idea of constructs and similarities and differences. So both of these led to less time for exploring what we really wanted to explore. 1 or 2 on the left described practices they hadn't participated in, and we didn't know this and realize this till well into the interview. And this, of course, meant that they weren't in a position to discuss the causes. On the right, many of them had difficulty in identifying similarities and differences. And this caused us to change strategy, but it made very little difference. So both of these led us to question the integrity of the constructs that we came out with. The third theme was causal pathways. It was often difficult to determine the causal threads. And why was this important? Well, sometimes it was kind of maybe obvious, so the practitioner didn't really know what to say. We're not sure why, but that was a difficulty. And the problem with that was we ended up prompting the practitioner, which is kind of against the idea of RGT, when you're not supposed to influence, when you're supposed to be able to elicit information that's unsullied by your influences. The last one was a difference in the shape of the construct systems. In some cases, they were very straightforward. In others, there was a whole lot of information, all that was relevant, and it was extremely difficult to pursue a single thread. And of course, this was quite frustrating and time-consuming. And an example of this, the thread on the left, it's a very straightforward thread that was easy to kind of elicit. On the right, you can see that there was much information in that large rectangle. These ideas were all kind of seemed to be related in the person's mind, and it was difficult to tease out individual lines of cause and effect. So our experiences led us to question the fit between a technique that's based on the notion of understanding variation in individuals' perspectives and trying to create or understand a framework to represent context, what's really there. The corollaries indicate that people have unique systems, they see things differently, and that their systems are not necessarily logical consistent. And this last one, perhaps, is why some people find it inherently difficult to discuss cause and effect in a meaningful way in these kinds of situations. We did learn a lot, and we have a lot of questions from the study. For example, can we infer insights into personalities and task preferences by looking at the richness of the threads provided and the number of ideas that came out from the practitioners and the concepts at the top, the core values. There are limitations to the study, mainly our inexperience with the technique. Neither of us had carried out the technique before. Perhaps we just didn't do it well. It may be that looking at practices, the technique's not suitable for something as complex as practices. Maybe it's okay for some objectives, but not for others. And of course, in the end, we're reporting on a meta-study when we'd actually hoped to report on just a plain study about practices. However, in summary, we believe that RGT was not the best approach for our objective, for the issues of time, data integrity, and threats complexity that we talked about. And also because the elicited constructs focused on people and not an objective context. We were hoping to get things like, teams in different locations, or new product versus established product, these sorts of things. And in general, that didn't happen. And our contribution is the highlighting and analysis of possible challenges when applying RGT in software engineering studies. Thank you.